AI adoption is being closely watched in 2026, and there have been a lot of theories thrown around as to why it has been slower than many tech companies would have hoped. Sarah Guo from Conviction wrote a good essay on X about that earlier this week. She also published a piece about how VCs can remain relevant in a hyper-competitive landscape, and she was at CES opening for Jensen Huang earlier this week. I want to bring her on to talk about all of that. Sarah, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. Great to see you.
So, quiet week for you to start off the year, eh?
Yeah. Well, I think we are just running on full cylinders in the industry.
Good stuff. Well, look, I want to talk to you about some of the stuff you wrote about. I also want to talk to you about the panel that you led at CES. You know, right after you had your panel, Jensen Huang unveiled some new details about the Rubin chip. And the broad question I have for you is what net impact you think that family of chips and those innovations from Nvidia is going to have on AI adoption broadly?
Yeah, I think the two basic takeaways for the broader industry versus chip experts would be one, like the Nvidia pace of innovation is like really punishing for competitors. Um, this is a 5x more powerful chip on a flops basis from an inference perspective. It is a huge, like it's a family of chips, but the systems are huge, and so there's continued scaling of um, memory and memory bandwidth and a lot of the bottlenecks that people have been concerned about in the NVIDIA ecosystem. And, late 2026 is a very near-term timeline to be delivering such a big upgrade, right? And so, we'll see what happens later this year. But I think if those chips actually get widespread in the industry on time, application developers and then end consumers should expect that we can use a lot more tokens for much less cost, right? Which is
And,
sort of the overall goal for NVIDIA here.
and when you say if those chips sort of get in the market on time, I mean, I guess the assumption that I'm hearing you say is that they eventually will get there and they eventually will get bought. It's just a question of when. Is that the idea?
Absolutely. So, it's been stated already that they're in full production,
Yeah.
and I'm only nodding to the fact that these are extremely large scale, like
Right. It's the whole
frontier
system.
hardware
It's the whole
systems
system.
delivered, right? And so you can end up with all sorts of constraints to get to final delivery at the massive scale we're talking about. But I do think this idea of inference efficiency that's starting with NVIDIA chips, but is also in all the software layers like these cloud platforms like Base 10. They The impact for the industry is that a lot of things that look like, much more advanced applications of AI, like long horizon agents, just smarter, applications overall are going to be widespread.
And a lot easier to roll out in some cases. It leads me to an essay that one of two essays you wrote on X, which is articles on X are now people's favorite way to get their message across. You wrote about AI adoption, and I want to read a quick passage from what you wrote. You said, there's a mismatch between where AI value is showing up and where organizations are looking for it. Enterprises complain about missing ROI even as demand for models and inference grows rapidly. Someone is getting the value, it just isn't always visible on a dashboard yet. I want to ask you about that. Who is getting the value then? If we can't see it on the dashboard, where is it coming up in companies?
So I think there's like a mix of who's getting that value today. If you do better journalism, right, using AI, you accrue some of the value. Maybe you get to go home earlier. Maybe the information gets better readership and engagement, right? But I'm not being glib. It's really like productivity gains get reaped in different ways.
Right.
Part of the point of the essay is there are a lot of reasons why we're like still very early in sort of business deployment of AI. But one of them is a product question, right? Things are very, very early in getting frontier capabilities exploited from a product perspective, like deeply in the workflows. But the reason my essay focuses on is like, what's the incentive structure, right? If I, leverage all of this productivity, and like, let's say 900 million plus ChatGPT users as an example, and everybody else consuming these tokens is actually leveraging these AI capabilities, well, I can take those gains or I can share them with my business. And you know, some of those gains are personal, obviously, in terms of new capability. But it depends on the incentive structure and like whether or not organizations really are aligned with their workers as sort of owners, right?
Right. Now, the other thing you talked a little bit about is the change management angle to this story. And that was something that you also covered in your panel before Jensen Huang came up on stage. Another part, and I do want to read it because yeah, I thought it was a good point in the essay, is you said using AI privately to improve your own output is generally safe. Proposing automation in a visible, coordinated way is not. And then you go on to say this often gets misread as fear of technology. It is better understood as caution about how institutions handle change. So, I talked about this a little bit with a couple months ago with Vinod Khosla, and he was talking about who the people are on the ground trying to use these tools. And your comments here kind of reminded me of a question that I've been having is it that we don't have the right people on the ground at these companies trying to implement AI, or just that those people uh, are resistant to it? I mean, where do you see the problem coming up?
I actually wouldn't say, in some cases, maybe it'll be a question of the people and the adaptability of the people. But I'd say for all humans, like, am I or are you using AI to the maximum effectiveness today? I am not. I don't know about you yet. But I really want to be. I don't think that's because I'm resistant to change. I think change is hard. And this change has happened really, really rapidly. Right. And so that's just like a fundamental recognition we should have, which is, change and technology adoption is hard for every human being. And if organizations want to happen, they really have to invest in that. I think like a lot of great organizations already understand that, but sometimes we're in this like vortex of misunderstanding the timescales of how quickly this is all happening. It's been
Right.
happening for 3 years, right? And so I think that's one recognition. But the fear, I think actually fear is really rational, right? If I think that I leverage AI and I figure out how to automate parts of my job, and I am smart and informed enough to know that AI capabilities are progressing, it's a natural question to ask, well, like, does my role change? Right? And do I
And,
get
and and
rewarded?
that causes some nervousness around, do I want to attach my name to this initiative, to this P&L?
Absolutely. And I think if that change affects other people too, when you like grow up in the management structure, it depends on the incentives within organizations, right? Okay. Well, do I want to change Akasha's role? Do I want to change Sally's role? And like, what does that do for me within the politics of an organization? I don't think
Right.
that's simply, it's just like these organizations have a bunch, every large organization has a bunch of mixed incentives. And the winners in this transition to AI native companies are going to have to figure out how to align that with the success of the organization.
Now, you talked in your panel about how healthcare has been sort of a sleeper sector that has really adopted AI faster than some would have otherwise expected. And Open Evidence is a portfolio company of yours that has seen as a lot of success. Can you talk about why healthcare has been sort of this oddball case study? And, what is it about Open Evidence's product that has really gotten traction?
I think there is a business model, uh, uh, alignment here that is really special in the case of open evidence. And then there's like a technical structural reason. So really quickly, open evidence is an app that any provider can use as a consumer, right? You like download it in an app store and you just start using it and it's free and it helps you with your day-to-day work against a really difficult challenge, which is understand medical research and be the best provider, the most informed provider you can, and expanding capabilities from there into sort of helping with all sorts of interactions. But like, there's no misalignment. It just makes me better at my job. And open evidence has an ad-based business model that supports that. Right. It doesn't have to do change management until half the doctors in the country are already using it. And that's a lot easier, right? The organization is convinced by its users that it's useful. And so I think this is just a really interesting case study for the industry, which is like consumer and prosumer can be a really powerful adoption mechanism. The technical reason why AI could be really interesting for healthcare is that a lot of the data and a lot of the interactions are unstructured, right? And so, large language models and agents, like in these fragmented systems, working on free text, medical research, doctor's notes in phone calls, it's really
Right.
good at that.
And I mean, they've been trying to find ways to make that a little bit more structured for a while now. Um, I'm curious, I know you got to run here. You put out this predictions episode on your podcast a couple weeks ago, and one of the predictions you made was that you are forecasting some kind of a change in the sentiment around robotics, or at least parts of robotics. And I thought that was interesting because the conversation around physical AI and robotics is becoming so much more. It's much more of a focus for everyone, really, even in the first few weeks of the year here. I mean, talk to me a little bit about why you see the sentiment around robotics changing, and what you're expecting there.
This is a very high risk year for the AI robotics industry, but that's why I'm excited, right? I think that there are a number of companies, uh, including Sunday Robotics in our portfolio, that are like meeting reality this year. They intend to ship real products to consumer homes for testing. And these are like they're step function different than the products that have existed before because they are, generally capable, right? They're not designed for a single task, much like the LLMs were different from the pre-foundation model task specific models. And so I think there's sentiment improving, or there's like all this heightened interest for two reasons. One is like all the researchers believe that there can be a huge amount of progress on both the models, data, and deployment side. And then of course, like if that is real, there's a lot of investment and a lot of big tests, real world evaluations that are going to happen this year. And it was a huge part of Jensen's CES keynote as well. He's been one of the earliest believers in the physical AI world, in part because that, multiplies the size of the opportunity for
Yeah, I know.
AI.
Well, I mean, the business case is certainly there.
Yeah, but it's a really high conviction bet to be investing in it for as long as he has, and I'm a big believer, but we'll sort of meet reality this year.
But where does that sort of collapse in sentiment happen then? I mean, where do you forecast it sort of breaking down?
None of this works yet in production, right? If you ask me, is there a generalist robot in any real world environment? Like me and other people from this industry are going to say no, right? So it's a really big open question. Um, they're like amongst robots are really hard products to deliver, right? Like think of autonomous vehicles as an example of it.
Yeah, yeah,
The safety case is really important, and the real world is always more varied than one would hope, right? Like, I
right.
think it's sort of easy to imagine, like in the home, but also, in factories or in data centers. And so, these robots have to be really robust to those environments, and the products are really hard to deliver to begin with. And so, we are going to see more failures than successes of these companies, and they're very expensive to ship, right? I think if they work, they're hardware companies. They can be, and perhaps general ones with really expansive applications. You could have hardware like Tesla, Apple, GE, Siemens type companies that are really impactful to the manufacturing world, which is another area of interest for us. But there's going to be a lot of failure as well, and it's
And
expensive.
I think it kind of leads to an interesting question for me, which is that, where does that cycle sort of start? Because, I think what you're pointing to is that investors will wake up to the reality that, hey, this stuff is not working as well. We shouldn't be affording it the valuations that we've seen sort of start to creep up. On the other hand, you have big public tech companies, continuing to talk about it as an application. And I guess in my mind, I'm sort of wondering what's the chicken, what's the egg? What comes first in terms of, if Nvidia continues to keep talking about it, I don't know. Does it take longer for investors to wake up to that reality? I wonder what you think.
Oh, I don't think so at all. I would push back and say, I don't know that the prices are wrong. Like some of those people, I think some of those people are going to be right at massive prices, and some of them are going to be wrong. Like in any other really high value market. Right, it's about picking winners. And Nvidia has been a huge contributor to this ecosystem, delivering models, open source data, frameworks, the hardware itself. And so I think they're definitely supporting the success case here, as you would expect. I would just say I think it's a question of like, does it work or not? And we can certainly have waves of sentiment you know uh, as an investor, if a specific bet doesn't work, your reaction can be that bet didn't work or the sector didn't work, right? And so I
Correct.
think that could be the change in sentiment.
Great. Well, Sarah, I want to thank you for coming on the show again. It's always a great conversation. That is Sarah Guo, founder and investor at Conviction here on TITV.